Good morning, Shannon. I want to do a mic check really quick. Can you hear me over there?
Yep. You can
All
hear
right.
us, right?
Yeah, perfect. Thank you.
All right, cool. Thanks.
Good morning, everyone. It's just a little bit after the top of the hour. We'll be starting this subcommittee meeting shortly.
Am I free to get started?
Yes, sir. We're ready for you.
All right. The February 16th meeting of the CAC Laboratory Subcommittee is now called to order. Thank you all for joining me today. As you may have noticed, the subcommittee is a little untraditional as it is a subcommittee of one. So I'm asking for stakeholder assistance in honing in on what the subcommittee should focus on in 2023 regarding laboratories under the DCC purview. For this meeting, I have posed a series of questions that I'd like to hear comments on from the public. That I'd like to hear comments from the public on. Then I will take all of the comments into account and craft future subcommittee meetings, agendas, and priorities as we dive into each topic over time. To kick off the discussion, I would like to state that the CAC's mandate is to advise the DCC on the development of standards and regulations pursuant to Division 10 of the Business and Professions Code, including best practices and guidelines that protect public health and safety while ensuring a regulated environment for commercial cannabis activity that does not impose such barriers so as to perpetuate rather than reduce and eliminate the illicit market for cannabis. Before we get started with the first question, I would like to read them all off. I encourage everyone to review the agenda on the DCC's website, but in order to try to keep the comments and everyone's focused in line, I'm going to read off all the questions first so everyone can have a chance to prepare a response to it. And then we will dive into question number one individually and open up for public comment. So the first question would be, what changes to regulations could be made to improve the quality of testing? Question number two, what changes to regulations could be made to improve the accuracy of test results? Question number three, how can further standardization between laboratories be achieved? Number four, what challenges are laboratories experiencing in moving towards annual licensure? And number five, how can consumer understanding of and or confidence in cannabis testing be strengthened? And finally, question six will be, what guidance and information from the DCC would be most helpful? So again, all these are available online, so I encourage you to review as you prepare your public comment. And I am not going to open up the floor with the first question of what changes to regulations could be made to improve the quality of testing. Moderator, of testing methods. Moderator, could you please open the floor for public comments?
Yes, we are now taking public comment on question number one, which is on the screen. If you'd like to make a comment on this specific question, please raise your hand by clicking the hand icon next to your name if you've logged in to the meeting, or by pressing *3 if you've called into the meeting. For the sake of time, you will have 3 minutes to speak with a 30-second warning. When your time is up, you will be muted and we will move to the next request for comment. Each commenter will have one opportunity to speak on each question. So we're going to kick this off with caller Commenter Travis, I've sent you a request to unmute. There you go, sir. You're unmuted. Go ahead.
Great. Can you all hear me?
Yes, sir.
Thanks. I think that one of the biggest changes that can be made to the regulations to improve the quality of testing would be to establish action limits for Category 1 pesticides. Additionally, changes to regulations that can improve quality would be around how the laboratories determine limits of detection and limits of quantitation, and making sure that the laboratories are determining those in a standardized way. I'll add that I think that there are a lot of good regulations, and that the addition of regulations isn't the best way to quality of testing methods. I think the best way to improve the quality of testing methods would be to enforce the regulations that are already established, and to enforce them equally across labs, and to provide guidance and interpretation of the regulations that already exist. Adding new regulations without providing guidance, interpretation, and holding all labs to the same standard isn't likely to improve quality. So I think in addition to regulation changes, there really needs to be a focus on how the DCC interacts with the laboratories, communicates those things, and enforces existing regulations. Thank you.
All right, attendee Alina Butler, I've sent you a request to unmute.
Working?
It sure is.
Sounds wonderful. Hello, everyone. Good morning. I am a scientist, so I'd like to just kind of give my background really quick before I give my my feedback. I have my master's degree in applied molecular biology, and so all things biology for public health and safety are really important to me. So I'm really thankful and grateful for you guys to have this meeting. After careful review of the regulations, I think they're off to a great start. However, I'm not satisfied with the microbial impurities testing. I think that the microbial impurities testing should be the same for every lab across the board. And I think we need to add in an enrichment period so that the organisms of interest, both the fungal species of Aspergillus and then the bacterial species of the Shiga toxin producing E. coli and the Salmonella, I believe they need to go through selective media enrichment periods for fungus, it takes 48 hours for that organism to grow. And so I don't understand how it would be physically possible, scientifically possible to actually test for Aspergillus accurately and adequately without giving that enrichment period. In addition to the enrichment period, I also believe that PCR needs to be added into the regulations because for plating, it's dangerous to have live organism out and about in such a way in labs that don't necessarily have experienced scientists such as myself. And even for myself in my education, plating is very old school. We use PCR now so that there's no question of, is this actually Aspergillus niger or is this another black mold? And so PCR helps eliminate that subjective judgment choices. And I think that could be something that is standardized across the board for every lab. That way, it doesn't matter what lab you're going to, you get the same results. And so in addition with the enrichment period and PCR, we could even confirm fails by plating. At that point, we can confirm by plating. But it's not really used for actually checking to see if the samples that are being tested are really being tested without having that enrichment period. Where it would go into the incubator, the organisms would incubate at 37 degrees Celsius.
30 seconds.
And you can actually give samples the time and the science integrity to be able to actually grow the organism so we can test to see if it's there or not. Because Salmonella is really important to test to see if it's there or not. Aspergillus is important to test to see if it's there or not. And same with the E. coli. So thank you for your time and let's go public health and safety with science integrity. Thank you.
Thank you. Attendee Josh Swider, I've sent you a request to unmute.
I appreciate the opportunity to speak today. My name is Josh Sweeter from Infinite Chemical Analysis Labs, annual license here in the state of California. We've been operating since 2015. We have been here through the regulation period since the beginning. We have echoed the same comments at these things many of times, as well as with the GCC. To start out, how can we improve the methods? Let's start there. Category 1 pesticides is a complete joke in this industry. Please fix this. We have voted during this meeting many of times to fix this and agreed to do this. The Department of Pesticide Control of the state of California made recommendations to the DCC many of times. They are not following through with their orders. Please look at this and create a fair playing field for Category 1 pesticides. Okay, second thing, if a laboratory reports failing stuff on the shelf to the DCC has an obligation to act on that and confirm or deny that report. I can tell you from my experience, 6 months later to check back in for a data package is not an adequate system for the DCC to check the public safety of the state of California. Please work on this and figure out a way to do that. That's a method they need to figure out. We just talked about, so Elena Butler was talking about PCR. I think the enrichment step I 100% agree on, and I think that's something that we're going to need here coming up. Second thing that we actually test for is alpha toxins. I think the alpha toxin testing that we have has problems in it, and it has to do with sampling. The amount of sample we sample for alpha toxins is not adequate enough. There needs to be a concentration step for alpha toxins. If you want to see other methods ran, look into other industries that test for alpha toxins. Why we don't see them much in this industry is because there's no concentration step. If we do that appropriately, we're going to make sure that there's no alpha toxins on any of the cannabis material, not just this little sub-segment. That's something that's very important to do when you write regulations of such. That's a method improvement that we could use. Sampling protocols, I kind of spoke on that. Sampling protocols are not being done homogeneously throughout the industry. Some laboratories will not sample appropriately. So this is the quality of a method. So the DCC needs to check on sampling protocols. They need to review the videos that are being taken. You can easily see that laboratories are being handed samples of 5 or 10 bags of something, and there's no sampling actually going on. And this is being done all across the industry. This has been reported to the DCC for years. And to tell the truth, I'm not sure what else we can say.
Seconds.
Okay, I'll raise my hand again. Let's see, cannabinoid concentration. So cannabinoid concentration, we developed the method, or the DCC developed the method and put it out. We're still waiting on the finalized method that we're supposed to have in effect in July. I'm not sure how many months we're going to be given to change this, but I'm not going to start developing a method that's not finalized yet. So I would ask and beg the DCC if they're going to propose some kind of method that potentially doesn't work, that they add.
Thank you. Your time is up. Attendee Carlos, I've sent you a request to unmute. Attendee Carlos, there you go.
At this subcommittee meeting, it's more of a question for me. Since labs are an extension of the state and labs are responsible for ensuring compliance with these regulatory requirements, how can we work with the DCC to advise the state moving forward in a more real-time manner that can be tracked, so that there's more of a dialogue back and forth, again, real-time, basically to ensure that labs remain solvent? That's my question. Thank you.
Thank you. Chairman Frazier, I'll remind commenters that we allow one opportunity per question. So we'll have an opportunity to go to question 2. But at this time, there are no other commenters. Chairman Frazier, would you like to close comment on question number 1?
Yes, I'd like to close public comment on question number 1. And
Actually,
moving on. Oh, do you have someone?
Never mind. No, it's fine. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, everyone, for your comments there. The second question is, what changes to regulations could be made to improve the accuracy of test results? Moderator, can you please open the floor to public comment?
Yes, and let me review. We are now taking public comment on question number 2. If you'd like to make a comment on this specific question number 2, please raise your hand by clicking on the hand icon next to your name if you logged into the meeting, or by pressing *3 if you called into the meeting. For the sake of time, you'll have 3 minutes to speak with a 30-second warning. And when your time is up, you will be muted and we will move on to the next request for comment. Each commenter will have one opportunity to speak on each question. So we'll start off with Josh Sweeter. I have sent you a request to unmute.
Thank
There
you,
you go.
moderator. I appreciate the chance to speak again. So the changes to the regulations that can improve accuracy of testing results is a simple thing. The changes to regulations would need some kind of blind sampling being sent to the laboratories. This can be conducted by the DCC, not to cause action, which would potentially be illegal, what everyone does not want to do, but to give them a resource to see what laboratories they need to investigate. This could be as simple as creating a sample, submitting it as an R&D sample to any laboratory, and submitting it to every single laboratory blindly with known concentrations, or just spiking on some pesticides or spiking on a solvent, or check a cannabinoid concentration. So by doing this, you could improve the accuracy of test results by learning which laboratories should be investigated by the DCC. This is a simple task with not much work to do, but that's what you do to fix the accuracy of test results. The other things you can do is go ahead and make sure that all laboratories are going to be imposed under these rules equally. I think Travis began to talk about this in the first question, is the fact that some labs are imposed regulations where other labs are not. If this is something that's unbelievable to you, there's a lot of results out there and a lot of data that can be viewed. I would really beg the DCC to have things like training that is conducted. We did it one time in the history of the BCC, to have training that we even just talk about, hey, we are seeing trends in the testing industry where no one's seeing chlorofeniper in flour. And let's make sure that everyone's doing this correctly. Or I'm seeing trends that now we see THCA in flour at 50%, which might not be right. So let's go ahead and we're going to let everyone know to make sure they're using cannabinoid concentrations correctly. I mean, there can be simple things to these training things to improve the accuracy of our test results are being done by just making sure that all testing labs are held to an equal standard. I mean, another thing, equal standards, making sure that everyone is conducting the tests correctly. So for even cannabinoid concentrations, you have to run your spike samples. And I can tell you the cost of that just to do spikes is extremely high. Well, some labs are charging below the cost for an analysis for that. So I'm very confused how laboratories can buy standards and be required by the DCC to create a spike onto a matrix sample that would cost more than their analysis. So maybe you should start looking into that. Thank you.
Thank you. Attendee Victoria, I've sent you a request to unmute.
Also, I work at a cannabis testing lab. We're licensed in the state of California. I work in sales, so I don't have the same scientific background as everybody here, but I want to start off by saying I'm 100% in support of everything Josh from Infinite said. And for a competing lab to be in support of another lab is how this should work. We should all be on the same page. I don't have the same amount of input because I feel like everything good to be said has already been said, but I think a really simple way to fix this would be to have the DCC send out samplers to collect samples to submit to random labs throughout the state. We know that the problems start at sampling. It's egregious. It's crazy to me that we've spent this long telling the DCC what's going on behind closed doors, and there's no answer or solution for it yet. And license holders and labs count on the fact that none of that footage will ever be reviewed. And that's a very sad position for us to be in as an industry. I think the DCC has a responsibility to step in and do something very quickly. These lawsuits that are coming to fruition are the result of everything that we've said for the past few years. And it's not fair that some of these companies on both sides are going to lose so much money, their licenses, their livelihood, and it's a result of inaction. Thank you.
Thank you. Attendee Travis, I've sent you a request to unmute.
Hi, thank you for the time. I'd also like to say that I agree with Josh Sweeter's suggestions. I think some changes to regulations that could be made to improve the accuracy of test results do include submitting blind samples where the DCC is either fortifying a sample or sending a known sample to the laboratories, and comparing results would be a great step toward thinking about accuracy. I also think that having good performance requirements for the methodology could improve accuracy. I'll point to the as yet overdue and unreleased DCC cannabinoid SOP as a place where performance requirements could be established and equivalency should be allowed, rather than following what is, following a method that is overly costly and overly burdensome. So I think that allowing equivalency in that methodology and improving performance requirements for methodology, starting with cannabinoids, would be great. And sending blind samples to the lab and actually following up on that would be a great idea. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Alina Butler, I've sent you a request to unmute.
Hello, hello. I'd like to reiterate my initial point about for accuracy of test results, how can we improve them? I think it is dire that we include an incubation period / enrichment period to microbial testing, because it is not scientifically possible to test to see if the organism is there without having an enrichment period. Especially for Aspergillus, it likes to go inside of the nug itself. And so if you're just washing off the outside of the nug, you're not accurately going to be able to detect whether or not Aspergillus is actually there or not. And so I think it's vital for an enrichment period to be added to the regulations, an enrichment period that's at least 48 hours. It takes time for these microorganisms to grow up, and it would probably slow down the industry so that we're not fighting these 2-day turnaround times. That how are you going to get accurate results when you have labs competing against each other, when we should all be on the same team of ensuring public health and safety? We're talking about medical patients potentially consuming these products. Yes, recreational patients as well, who could also be immunocompromised, but also medical patients. And so if we really care about health and safety, then we need to do something so that we're accurately testing to see if the microorganisms are there. Salmonella is a really serious organism that can make people really sick and die. And there's no incubation period to actually test to see if salmonella is even there. And then on top of that, there needs to be 2 different selective medias for fungus and a selective media for bacteria. They like different carbon sources to eat, to grow, and to flourish. And so it is vital that this enrichment period is put in place with proper selective medias, as well as PCR testing of the enrichment afterwards. That way we can remove the selectivity, because we want, it doesn't matter what lab you go to, you will get the same results. So thank you for your time.
Thank you. Eric Paulson, I've just sent you a request to unmute. Eric Paulson? Try *6 if you're on your phone. There you go.
Sorry about that. I'd first like to say I totally agree with a lot of the comments that Travis and Elena and Victoria and Josh said. Just to kind of add a bit of suggestions to the blind sampling. If we included all different matrices, flour, edibles, tinctures, concentrates, to ensure that every lab can test every matrix properly. Really, the incentive should be to reward labs for, developing test methods that are accurate, not necessarily prescribe a single test method. And then the other thing is to, establish a more formal program for communication with the state and the, state testing laboratory for submitting samples, submitting complaints, receiving responses for those complaints. There needs to be more transparency and more communication with the DCC so that labs know what they're doing right, what they're doing wrong, and what processes can be done to kind of improve the whole system. It starts with communication and accountability, I think, are really the biggest two things. Thank you.
Thank you. Sarah Otis, I've sent you a request to unmute. There you go.
This is Sarah Otis from Anresco Laboratories. I've been in cannabis testing for about a decade now, both in California and other states. So I just wanted to echo Josh's point about round robin testing and add a little bit to that. I agree that the state should be responsible for doing round robin testing with blind round robin testing within the labs. Right now, a lot of proficiency testing allows up to 40% variability, and that's just too high to prove that a test is as accurate as it needs to be. There are states who have been doing round robin testing in cannabis labs for many years now. And I wanted to add that it needs to be prepared in an ISO accredited facility. Many of the proficiency tests are done by ISO 17034 accredited facilities. So to ensure that those samples are actually homogeneous, they need to be prepared properly and then sent out to all the labs blindly, so they don't know that it's a round robin test, and they can't amend their method just for that round robin test. And then I additionally wanted to add that some kind of secret shopping that the DCC could do to help with ensuring that they are validating the test results that are already on retail shelves. This is something that is written into the regulations in other states. Like I believe Maryland has this written into their regulations that the regulators will be responsible for doing some level of secret shopping and investigating results that come outside of a certain variability on the test result that's on the package. I also wanted to add that we've seen test results on a COA that are well over 100%. And so adding some kind of requirements for measurement uncertainty and acceptability of measurement uncertainty, I think would help to improve accuracy of test results. Thank you very much.
Thank you. All right, Chairman Fraser, we have no more public comment for question number 2. Would you like to move to number 3?
Yes, I'd like to close public comment on question number 2. And now the next question is, how can further standardization between laboratories be achieved? Moderator, could you please open the floor to public comment?
Yes, I can. We are now taking public comment on question number 3. If you'd like to make a comment on question number 3, please raise your hand by clicking the hand icon next to your name if you've logged on to the meeting, or by pressing *3 if you've called into the meeting. You'll have 3 minutes to speak with a 30-second warning, and when your time is up, you'll be muted and we'll move to the next request for comment. Each commenter will have one opportunity to speak on this question. So we will kick this off with Travis. I have just sent you a request to unmute.
Hello, thank you. I think that the best ways that further standardization between laboratories can be achieved is really an action that can be taken by the DCC with the existing regulations. And I think that what they can do is they can provide actual guidance on the regulations, and they can make sure that the guidance they provide on the regulations is provided to all of the labs and sort of enforced equally among the labs. We know that different labs are given different answers about regulations, are told that they have to achieve different things that are not written in the regulations. And this really creates an uneven playing field. So the best step that can be taken now with existing regulations is for the DCC to provide equal guidance and equal enforcement across the laboratories. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Victoria, I've sent you a request to unmute. Victoria, if you can, use *6 if you're on your phone. We will move on to Eric Paulson. I've sent you a request to unmute.
Hi, yes, thanks. Yeah, in addition to the kind of standardization, requirements that Travis mentioned, I think just, most labs that have been around these days have been, they've been around for a few years. They've kind of developed their methods to, produce accurate results. It's just not, the labs sometimes are not always using the most accurate methods. They're modifying their methods to produce favorable results for customers. So I think enforcement is the biggest thing, to make sure that the labs that are acting poorly are not, rewarded for that, and they're being penalized for it. And again, for transparency for the DCC to show that these actions are being taken, and it provides a disincentive for laboratories to produce inaccurate results. And the laboratories will kind of clean themselves up, I think, when they see this occurring and they know that, action is being taken, to basically make sure that the good actors are doing good things. Thank you.
Thank you. Josh Sweeter. I just sent you a request to unmute.
Thank you, moderator. Standardization between laboratories can be achieved in many different ways. One way would be, during the license period, the DCC could be providing samples in different matrices for different analytes. So if someone's going to be, let's say, I'm going to do pesticides in gummies or in an edible matrix, the DCC during the licensing process could provide me a PT sample. So I don't think PT samples are accurate or applicable to the matrix of cannabis. So the DC has enough stuff on their shelf where they could do that. And that could be another step in the licensing. I can't say as a laboratory, I could test flower for potency, other things, until I have some kind of proof that I can actually do it. That would go back to the very beginning about this licensing period and the standardization between labs. I understand it's very difficult to start reading everyone's SOPs and validation packages, and in all reality, SOPs and validation packages aren't always necessarily the thing that's going to tell you if something's going to work or not. So this is used in many other industries where they send kind of samples around to all labs and make sure that these things are being conducted. And if you're not hitting the achievable marks that the rest of the labs are for contaminants, you're no longer allowed in the group anymore. You'll be removed from the EPA certification or things like that. This is something very easily achieved. Another way to do it is round robin testing between the laboratories to make sure that everyone's producing the same results. With this being said, they don't have to go ahead, the DC doesn't have to go make samples to prove something or to send out. This can be achieved easily, like the state of Michigan does multiple times a year. All laboratories must report to one single lab on a specific day and a specific time slot. And what happens is they go grab something off of a shelf. So like I have Infinite Chemical Analysis Labs in Michigan. The CRA, it's called out there, would then show up to my lab and be like, guess what? Today we're going to choose this backstock of flour, because every year, every so many months, we have to choose a large sample and backstock it and homogenize it. I already created a test result for it. And it shows full passing. And then 12 other labs will show up to my lab one day, take that backstop that was homogenized under the supervision of the DCC, and then everyone else tests it. And guess what happens? The cheating stops, because one day you might get caught. This is not too hard to conduct or do at all. Another way to do it, like I said, is sampling backstock. Another way to do it is round robin testing off the shelf. You could have every laboratory or 6 laboratories go get the same sample from the same dispensary under no cost, because that's just something that can be written into the law. You would standardize and check and confirm these things using the labs you have. Creating an internal state lab can be done, but it has to be done efficiently in a timely manner, and the DCC has already blown that chance. So please regulate the laboratories that has already been acting. This isn't a new thing. We're 6 to 7 years into this, guys. This isn't like we started yesterday. Please figure out a way to do it with the resources you have, and use the laboratories as the resource you are given.
Thank you. Caller Frank Beretta, I've sent you a request to unmute.
I serve as the Director of Quality and Compliance for Sci Labs We're a cannabis testing facility in Michigan and in California. I would just like to make sure that the DCC and this work group especially is familiar with AOAC's Cannabis Analytical Science Program and the deliverables of that work group. The CAS program has been issuing standard method performance requirements for all of the compliance testing that's required in the state of California. I believe by forcing laboratories to demonstrate their analytical ability to meet these performance requirements would start to align some of the abilities, removing the integrity component that some labs may choose to use to bias their lab results. I believe that the deliverables of the CAS program, including the additional chapter to the ALAC guidance document that is currently being worked on, will help cannabis laboratories onboard some of the best practices that have been identified already in our industry. This is similar to how other analytical components of food, dietary supplements, and pharmaceutical industries work. And I think we can use those best practices to raise the bar in our own industry. Thank you.
Thank you. Beth Cantrell, I've just sent you a request to unmute.
Yeah, I'm Beth Cantrell. I'm with Confidence Analytics. We operate testing laboratories in both Washington State and California. One thing I'd like to say, I support a lot of the comments other speakers have stated about a variety of things, whether round robin testing or further investigational studies. But one tool nobody has mentioned is all of the data that is available in Metric or through the CSV uploads that a lot of labs do with their results. There's so much statistical analysis that can be performed across product types, across labs, to kind of flag data that doesn't fit within what would be standard or a normal distribution for a particular product type, or missing data, you know, if certain things are not going up that should. And I think that is a tool that could be better utilized to determine where investigations should occur or where the problems are. So, you know, that's a pretty low-hanging fruit. You know, data analysis is much easier to do in a lot of ways than, you know, developing and instituting a state laboratory or things like that, which would also be fantastic ideas. So I just want to throw out there that, you know, we have all this data in Metric, and that is a tool that can be used to examine lab results, standard distributions, and other things that are important to standardization across laboratories. Thank you.
Thank you. Zachary Eisenberg, I've just sent you a request to unmute.
I'm Zachary Eisenberg. I'm Vice President of Enresco Laboratories. We've been operating in the cannabis space for 7+ years, but have also operated as a food lab for almost 80 years. The fact of the matter is that labs are intentionally reporting inaccurate results. So it's not necessarily a matter of, you know, if they are provided. Oh, so to evidence that, we've seen multiple labs that have advertised proprietary methods for achieving higher potency results, saying, you know, we can achieve 3 to 4% higher results than any other lab. We've seen reports that are closer to 110% in total cannabinoids and terpenoids, which is just physically not possible. And we've even seen some reports where the limits of detection for some of the contaminant analyses are higher than the DCC action limits. It seems that there needs to be economic repercussions for labs that are dry labbing or incapable of meeting the regulations as written. But for whatever reason, when there is a suspension of a laboratory, it's not promoted. It's not, the reasons for the suspension are not told to the public. And I think this kind of results in this slap on the wrist doesn't result in permanent changes in how laboratories, you know, operate. So one, I think there needs to be more transparency in terms of how labs are regulated, and if they are doing something improperly, that's made known so that their customers can choose a lab that will less likely have issues in the future. And also, if products are egregiously mislabeled or contain harmful contaminants, either due to secret shopping or due to other labs doing their own surveillance sampling and finding these discrepancies, then I think the DCC needs to take action, and that means recalls of products if need be for public health. And once companies realize that there's an economic consequence to choosing labs purely based on who's going to provide the highest potency results and or not fail their products, then I think the system will sort itself out. Thank you.
Thank you. Sarah Otis, I've sent you a request to unmute.
Thank you, Sarah Otis, also with Resco. I just want to echo what Zach said. I really don't think it's about implementing further standardized methods. I think it's about enforcing the regulations that are already there. And we've seen with the standardized method that was proposed for potency, that method was not very robust. It was not properly validated in multiple labs to ensure that it was the proper method for all matrices that it was proposed in. And so I think it's really about ensuring that the methods that the labs have worked so hard to develop, have spent tons of capital on developing their own methods because there were no standardized methods when we started doing this, that the good actors that have worked on very robust, very good methods, that they're allowed to continue using their own methods that have been verified, and the labs that are using methods that are not appropriate or that are purposefully inflating results, that those are enforced, and that there's some oversight and accountability from the DCC. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, Chairman Frazier, that looks like the end of comment for question number 3. We can move on to question number 4.
Absolutely. So now let's turn to question number 4. The question is, what challenges are laboratories experiencing in moving to annual licensure? Moderator, could you please open the floor to public comment?
I sure will. All right, public comment is open for question number 4 specifically. As a reminder, this is raising your hand to ask a question. You can, if you're logged onto the meeting, you can raise your hand or press *3 if you've called in. You have 3 minutes to speak with a 30-second warning, and each member of the public will have an opportunity to comment once on this particular question. So let's get started with Eric Paulson. I've just sent you a request to unmute.
Hi, just this is me speaking from Infinite Chemical Analysis Labs. We've actually received our annual license, but I will say that it was definitely a challenge and a journey. And in order to go through these hoops, we would submit our validation packets, basically everything the DCC requested of us, and it would take months upon months to receive any communication back from them about our validation packages. I think when we did receive those comments, within a day or two we submitted our responses to those comments, and then another couple months went by before we received any feedback from that. So I think the review process needs to be sped up. If that requires adding additional reviewers or something, that might help. But really, there needs to be just better communication back and forth between the DCC and the labs on what exact steps needs to be taken, what are the next steps in the process, and what deficiencies does the lab have. And just a quick response to the standard method performance requirements that was mentioned in the previous question. I believe that while standard method performance requirements are good, we have seen firsthand that there's some issues with some of the performance requirements that maybe have not been fully screened and validated. For instance, for concentrates at high levels, the SMPR suggests that you need to be between 98 and 102% recovery. I can tell you that if you're talking about accuracy of test results, that's not necessarily unachievable, but when you're doing a validation where you're spiking samples and the uncertainty associated with the spikes, it's really hard to show that in a validation. I will say that. Thank you.
Thank you. Michael Roman, I've sent you a request to unmute. You are unmuted.
There's no path to annual licensing. I haven't seen anything that says, here are all the steps you need to go through. Here are the timelines in which you need to do it in order to obtain your annual license. And after 4 years, we have one lab, maybe a couple more that have gotten their annual license out of 45 licensed labs. That tells me that there's something extremely broken within the system of getting your annual license. Also, labs who have a provisional license have far fewer rights than a lab that is on its annual license. So I think it's imperative that DCC prepares and gives labs a path to annual licensure. Our experience has been we get asked for certain information and we give it, much like Eric Paulson said, you don't get a response, and or you change your rep changes at DCC, and then you start the process all over again. They ask for the same things you've already turned in. So the process has so far has been redundant and not very useful. And DCC needs to come out with something that provides the path to annual licensure for labs. Thank you.
Thank you. Josh Sweeter just sent you a request to unmute.
Appreciate it, moderator. So those challenges with or the annual licenses, I believe, stem from the lack of communication with the DCC as well with the laboratories. As going through the only annual license, I believe, in the state of California, the communication is very hard. And here's an example from Michigan. We had a question about regulations about a new validation thing they wanted to achieve out in Michigan. So I proposed a group of the people that run the lab committee out there, as well as the head, and we all got on a phone call and we discussed it. And it was an open communication. Not once did they say, I can't answer your question. Not once did they cite a regulation at me. They had an open communication discussion about what we're doing. This is where we're failing as the state of California. There is not an open communication. It's I'm hiding behind regulations and can't talk to you as a scientist. If you put scientists on the phone, they should be able to talk to you as scientists. If they are going to validate some annual license method, they should be able to speak on the science behind it. If they cannot, they should not be a part of the committee doing annual licenses. Now, should they for testing labs? Let's think about that and let's regroup and think about it. A couple things I wanted to talk about real quick. Beth talked about the metric stuff. This is for annual license metric. We brought up that just reviewing metric data 5,000 times to the DCC, written up papers for them, sent them to them. I'm not sure what else to do on that. COAs with 100%. That we have set COAs with over 100% to the state.
Josh, this item is for question number 4, which is what challenges are laboratories experiencing in moving to annual licensure?
Okay, sorry about that. I got a little confused. I'll go ahead and stop there. Appreciate it. Bye.
Thank you. Travis, I've sent you a request to unmute.
Thank you. I'll echo what other commenters have said. I think that the challenges we're experiencing in moving to annual licensure come from a lack of timely responses by the DCC and also a lack of a clear pathway by the DCC. There's not really any transparency in the process. And, you know, the DCC is fond of sending email requests to laboratories, demanding a response within 24 hours on topics, and, you know, questions and information about licenses will go for months without any response from the DCC. So I think improving the timeliness and transparency would help labs move to annual licensure. Thank you.
Thank you. Sarah Otis, I've sent you a request to unmute.
Hello, thank you very much. Yeah, and the topic of annual licensure, I just wanted to say, first of all, I agree that the auditing process can be very confusing with the back and forth. You know, typically an auditor reviews all of the documents, they issue findings, and then the lab has a specific amount of time to respond to those findings, and then the findings are accepted or they're given more time. And in this back and forth, it seems like, in my experience, the DCC would respond, the lab would give give the response, and then there would be more things that the DCC would find the second time and go back and like issue more findings. So it became very hard and difficult to get those done all in a timely manner. And then also a lack of clarity for the I want to say the validations. There's even some confusion on the terminology used in the regulations. For example, the term CRM. The term CRM is defined in two different ways. First as like a certified reference material, which would be like a standard, but when they're talking about validations, they use it as a third-party matrix spiked sample that has to recover between 80 and 100%. And I know a lot of labs had no idea what that meant in the context of the regulations until they asked the DCC, and the DCC defined that term in a different way than it's actually defined in the regulations. Thank you.
Thank you. Chairman Frazier, that's the end of the comments for question number 4.
All right, thank you, everyone. We're now going to move on to question number 5. The next question is, how can consumer understanding of and/or confidence in cannabis testing be strengthened? Moderator, can you please open the floor for public comment?
Yes, we are now taking public comment on question number 5. You will have 3 minutes to speak on this topic, and you'll be given a 30-second warning. And each member of the public will have one opportunity to speak on each agenda on this particular question. And we will start this off with Josh Sweeter.
Thank you, moderator. I'll stay on track this time. So the consumer understandings of the confidence of cannabis testing strengthened. I think the biggest thing that is lacking for the consumers is the ability to obtain a COA. So I understand the state of California has issued legal limits or action levels for specific pesticides or solvents. But if someone wants to choose not to consume that pesticide or solvents, they should be able to see these COAs. I understand that the DCC leaves it to the dispensaries to show the COAs. There should be an open source book that anyone that buys a product should be able to look up a metric number and pull the exact COA for that product. Let's say, for example, I don't want to consume pyrethrins, but the action level for pyrethrins is 500 parts per billion, and it's 300 parts per billion. Why can I not make the choice with the data being out there to not consume this? Why can I not see the COA? I understand that they're allowed to have them in the dispensaries. I would challenge the DCC to go into every dispensary and ask for a COA for all the products on the shelf and see how many you get. The answer is 0. I've tried this 1,000 times. Please go ahead and make this an open forum for them so they can understand it. You can do training sessions and things like that, but you have to be able to give the consumers the right to be able to see the testing of the product on it and to make their own informed decisions if they want to. Thank you.
Thank you. Victoria, I've sent you a request to unmute.
I am approaching this comment as a consumer because I've been consuming for 20 years, but I'm definitely an educated consumer because I've definitely seen behind the scenes. I think part of the problem is the consumers have too much faith that the testing process is working in their favor right now, and it's simply not. The fact that certain brands that have certain product types know that they have to test at certain labs because of higher LODs is concerning. I'm also a mother. I know that my kid's easiest way to access cannabis in the next few years is probably going to be through vaping. There's a lot of very concerning aspects to this for me. Again, I'm approaching this as an educated consumer. I think Josh hit the nail on the head. Consumers need to be able to see COAs. I've walked into a dispensary myself and asked for access to a COA and was told that they weren't able to give that to me. QR codes frequently don't work on these products. The whole experience does not work in favor for consumers, but the picture that's being painted by the state and by brands is that they are giving them safe products to consume. So they're not making decisions based on easily digestible information to them. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Eric Paulson, I've sent you a request to unmute.
Hi. Yeah, first, I would also like to second the availability of COAs. What is the point of testing a product and putting it on a shelf if that does not provide added value for the consumer. The added value doesn't just come in producing a piece of paper that says this is okay to put on the shelf. It's information for the consumer. And I think it's one of the reasons perhaps that these COAs are not on the shelf or are not made available to the consumers is because there's a discrepancy between the tested amount and the labeled amount. Often, the DCC allows a 10% variance between the tested amount and labeled amount to be considered accurate label. One way to get around that is, and I know it would potentially cause a little bit extra work on the distribution end, but to have the label match what the COA says, rather than the manufacturer or cultivator putting an arbitrary label on a product. The product isn't labeled until after the testing is done, and the label matches the result exactly from the COA. I think that would be a good step towards providing some continuity with the COA, and then the COA is readily available. And I think just consumer knowledge could be increased by having someone at a dispensary who's knowledgeable about COAs and can explain the whole process of testing to the consumer, and maybe have a display in the dispensary to make the biggest. I think the biggest difference between the illegal and legal markets is the legal market requires testing to be done. So that needs to be communicated to the consumer so that they know they should buy their stuff in a legal dispensary rather than an illegal one, because they have that assurance that the testing is providing them, safety and value. Thank you.
Thank you. Travis, I've sent you a request to unmute.
Thank you. I will echo a comment that previous commenters made. The single best way that consumer understanding and confidence in cannabis testing can be strengthened is by open access to the certificates of analysis for all results for compliance samples in California. I understand there's a regulation that prohibits metric data access, but the COAs are not metric data, and the COAs have to be submitted to the DCC. So I think having that access is critical. I think it would be great if further than just the COAs, access to the entire data package was made publicly available for all samples in the state of California. Thank you.
Thank you. John Brower, I've sent you a request to unmute. John Brower.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I'd like to echo the previous commenters. Getting consumer access to the COAs should be the foundation of bringing a value to the regulated market. It's the only thing that distinguishes regulated product from unregulated product. There's several active markets in the state at this time. One is the traditional market of producers that were unable or unwilling to attempt licensing. Then we've got the new hemp-derived cannabinoids that are everywhere and can be ordered and delivered at your door with the swipe of a thumb. There's far more of that being consumed than I think anybody imagines. And those have zero testing, zero consumer protections. To bring an added value to where a consumer or adult consumer or a patient might make the decision to go through all the extra hassle to go to a regulated retailer and buy regulated product, there needs to be a value to that. And today there's not. So we're watching the regulated market continue to slip and falter. So I think making these COAs available is critical, but also the state having some sort of budget to run labs on the unregulated product that they might come across and the hemp-derived products that are being used for human consumption, making those available also can only strengthen the regulated market. And it's exactly what's needed is greater differentiation between regulated and unregulated. The California product should be the safest in the world, but we need a way to communicate that. Thank you.
Thank you. Sarah Otis, I've sent you a request to unmute. Sarah Otis. There you go.
Very much. Yeah, I think more emphasis needs to be put on the requirement of training of employees who work in the regulated cannabis market. I've recently seen regulations in other states that require a very robust training program that a third party would provide, but it's an approved training course from the regulators that would ensure consistent information that's being provided to people who are working in positions like bud tenders, other retail positions, production, and also laboratories, so that everyone's getting the same information. I think we can provide COAs, but we also need to ensure that the bud tenders that are providing those are properly trained on how to read a COA and what the information means. And then I also saw in these other regulations, I believe it was Maryland, I can check on that, but that if you're in a management position, you need to take this second set of training modules that goes even deeper into that. I've met people recently who consume cannabis who don't even know what a terpene is. I've met bud tenders who don't even know what a terpene is. And the fact that we're putting all the value that our consumers really only know how to value cannabis by the THC number, and that's creating the environment to value cannabis only by THC, and it's contributing to the widespread potency inflation. So I think emphasis really needs to be put on DCC required and DCC sanctioned education programs. Thank you.
Thank you. Michael Roman, I've sent you a request to unmute.
Hi, thank you. One of obviously the top priorities of DCC is consumer protection which is why we have testing in the state of California. The issue is, I believe there's a high percent of consumers who don't even know what a certificate of analysis is, and even more importantly, how to access one. I think two things need to happen. One, there needs to be DCC needs to put out a COA awareness campaign, making consumers aware that there are certificate analysis out there, and educate them on that, and also require dispensaries to give a copy of that COA with every product sold. Don't put it on the consumer to have to go to some database and figure out how to look it up. Require that it's given to them at the time of purchase. And that would also then make sure that the dispensaries have those COAs on hand, because if they can't provide it, then they can't sell the product. Thank you.
Thank you. Chairman Frazier, that looks like the last comment on question 5, so we can move on to question 6.
All right. And finally, for my last question today, what guidance and information from the DCC would be most helpful? There's been several comments about training and different interpretations of regulations. So let's speak a little bit about what information specifically would you be looking for, and what do you think the impact that would have on the sector? Moderator, could you please open it up for public comment?
Sure will. We are now taking questions, taking comment on question number 6. I think we have this down, but just to refresh, you have 3 minutes to speak. You get a 30-second warning. You have 1 opportunity to speak on each one of these questions. And we will kick this off with Travis. I've sent you a request to unmute.
I'd like to thank the moderator for moderating a smooth meeting, and I'd like to thank the advisory committee for the work that they do. I understand that they're in sort of a tough position here, hearing from us and trying to relay that and into something useful for the industry. So I appreciate the work everyone's doing here today. The guidance and information from the DCC that would be most helpful to the laboratories is the guidance and information that is transmitted to all of the labs equally and enforced equally. That's the most important thing. And then specifically in this time period, guidance and information that would be most helpful is guidance and information about the rulemaking process on the DCC cannabinoid method. This is a method that we were supposed to have permanent rules for by the first of the year. In the drafts of the rules, there's a date of July this year for the DCC SOP to go into effect. We don't know when we're going to get the final rule. We don't know if that July date is going to be pushed out as the regulations themselves have been pushed out. So we're in a difficult position of knowing when, balancing when to start working on a method and not wanting to bear the expense of working on a previous draft of a method that changes. The DCC has been unhelpful in letting us know when to expect the regulations and when those regulations will go into effect. And that's something that we need urgent information and guidance on right now. Thank you all for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Josh Sweeter, I've just sent you a request to unmute.
I appreciate it, moderator, for helping out today, and thank you, Antonio, for putting this together with your one-man committee. Great questions, and this could be very helpful. What guidance and information would be helpful with the DC? I think there's a few things that could be helpful to provide everyone. So recently there's a remote testing laboratory with no reasoning why, and I understand during the regulations they don't have to give reason because they were not an annual license. But this brings up a lot of questions in the industry that should be the consumer safety, and no consumer knows why a revoked license happened, but yet no product recalls were done when a revoked license happened. Does that mean that they didn't do anything wrong, or should people be questioning anything they consume that was tested from that laboratory? That's guidance that the DC needs to adhere to, is being open and compliant with everyone in this industry. The other thing is the guidance that would be very helpful to us is actually giving us guidance and having a conversation. Conversation is a two-way street, and we need to hear from people and get to hear opinions and information. I mean, not everything has to be hidden behind rules and statutes, and that does not help us grow an industry or fix a broken industry. So the guidance from them would just be giving us guidance. I appreciate the time today. Have a good day, guys.
Thank you. And we have another commenter, Eric Paulson. I just sent you a request to unmute.
Yes, again, I'd like to thank you, Moderator Nina, for running a tight meeting, and thank you, Antonio, for having us. I think that the biggest guidance, the biggest amount of information from the DCC would again be, to assure us that, while not all problems will be solved, with this testing industry, very quickly. We would like to know that steps are being taken, and they don't have to be specific about what investigations are being done, but to at least necessarily communicate to us that steps are being taken. We've had communications with the DCC 6 months ago, 12 months ago, and there were assurances that steps were being taken, but there was no details, and we have no kind of follow-up that certain steps have already been taken. So their communication, again, like Josh said, is a two-way street. We just need to hear more from the DCC. We all want this to be a better industry and a more well-regulated industry and a safer industry. And we want the good players to be rewarded. And that's what we try to be every day. And I know all the labs on this call are the same way, and we don't feel that that's truly the case. So anyway, thank you for your time. I'll finish there.
Thank you. All right, Chairman Frazier, it looks like that's the end of comment for question number 6.
All right. Thank you, everyone, for your time today. This conversation has been extremely helpful, and I will consider all of this input when setting the agenda for future subcommittee meetings. I encourage everyone to submit outlines of the programs or ideas that you've commented on today in writing to the CAC email, which is in the agenda. That'll be very helpful to see it in writing so that we can take it back and have it all in digestible format. It was kind of hard to write as quickly as everyone was speaking. And with that being said, the meeting is adjourned.